A New York Times story may have backfired in spectacular fashion with a new report that may indicate that the Obama administration did, in fact, spy on the Trump campaign. Buried deep in yesterday's piece on the origins of the Russia probe, more than 40 paragraphs down, is this revelation. At least one government informant met several times with Carter Page and George Papadopoulos, current and former officials said. President Trump reacted to the revelation by tweeting that it could be bigger than Watergate. But was this really a misstep by the Times, or was it done on purpose? Roger Stone rejoins us for a reaction to this major development. Also, Fox News contributor and Federalist senior editor Molly Hemingway and former Whitewater prosecutor Saul Weisenberg. Saul, your reaction to that little nugget that was buried in the New York Times piece?
Well, it's absolutely shocking and very improper in my view that the FBI apparently penetrated and had an undercover person on the Trump campaign, and that they used the lesser standards of a counterintelligence investigation.
Explain that for us, for people who don't understand. To open counter-intel investigation, you don't need a criminal predicate, correct?
Well, you don't need a criminal predicate, and it's one thing to say they had enough evidence to open an investigation of whether there is Russian espionage, but certainly they weren't close to being anywhere near able to say we have some evidence of espionage by people in the Trump campaign. And they never could have opened a criminal investigation based on that. And so instead, they used the excuse of counterintelligence. It's a huge scandal. And you're absolutely right. It was put in that story because they knew it was going to come out, and they're trying to be able to say that's old news and that's not really a big deal.
Molly.
Yeah, I think it's not that this might be happening, that the FBI was spying, but what we have now are multiple former FBI officials fully saying that there was broad surveillance on the Trump campaign, that it wasn't just Carter Page, but it was 4 separate high-ranking individuals, that it was wiretaps, that there were national security letters, and at least one human intelligence source about whom, we don't know a lot, how many there were they sent in by the FBI, were they walk-ins? I mean, there's so much information to find out, but it's not a question of that this might indicate that they're spying. They're saying they spied, and they're saying they did it in a pretty broad fashion.
Remember
as well.
when Trump was ridiculed by everyone when he said, I was wiretapped? I mean, he speaks in shorthand at Twitter. I was wiretapped, or whatever that tweet was.
He meant surveilled.
Yeah, he meant surveilled. He was right.
He was absolutely right. Judge Andrew Napolitano.
They trashed him.
Right here on Fox was the first one to call this. Look, this has to be seen in context. Not only did they use a phony, fabricated dossier as the underlying legal rationale for the spying on the Republican candidate for president, using the power, the authority, and the capability of the state to spy on one of the 2 major party candidates, an abuse of power, but now they infiltrated the Trump campaign with a FBI agent. This makes Watergate look like small potatoes.
It looks like this guy, Stefan Halper, who teaches at Cambridge. He's an American citizen. He's a bushy neocon guy.
Definitely.
You know him, Roger.
I played poker with him. He's an excellent poker player.
Yeah, apparently. But it looks like, it's been reported, Daily Caller, others, I know DeGeneva's on this, he might have been someone who was trying to suggest a lot of things to the Trump campaign. But he didn't work for the Trump campaign. But it was reported that he approached many different Trump campaign people to try to give them information. What do you make of that, Saul?
Well, you would call that a potential entrapment, an agent provocateur in the campaign. I hadn't heard that yet, but it wouldn't necessarily surprise me. But it's shocking enough that based on the kind of flimsy evidence that they had, that they would put somebody into the campaign. The FISA is disturbing enough because we know they didn't reveal something very important to the FISA court. But to have a plant in the political campaign of your opponent, if you do something like that, you better have dynamite. And it looks like they didn't have dynamite. And it's all part of a pattern, the pattern of Sally Yates investigating Mike Flynn for the Logan Act. It's all part of a very disturbing
She was out defending all this yesterday.
There's an additional problem with this, which is Congress is currently trying to find out information about these types of things. And the FBI is telling them that they can't turn over that information. At the same time, you're seeing leaks with personally identifying biographical and, career information about this source that was used, and there's at least one source. They're telling the New York Times, they're telling the Washington Post, but they won't turn over the information to Congress, which
Why?
is actually
because they want to make themselves look as good as possible before this IG thing comes out and before other documents come out. I mean, this narrative is being painted, bearing the lead in the New York Times. And Rudy just said on Sean Hannity's show that they are discussing with Mueller now narrowing the scope of the questions. I don't like him going in and talking to Bob Mueller at all, because I don't like I think this whole thing stinks to high heaven, but it looks like they've made progress on narrowing the questions.
I made this point on InfoWars the other day. There's no circumstance under which the president should go in for an interview. It's a perjury trap. And the idea that Rod Rosenstein and Jeff Sessions will not turn over to Congress a co-equal branch of government information regarding the surveillance of the Trump campaign with the illegitimate use of FISA warrants, that is an impeachable offense.
Do you think Obama had no knowledge of this?
On the contrary, what did the president know, and when did he know it?
How does the president of the United States not know that we are doing a counter-intel investigation on the opponent of the woman who would succeed him?
Peter Strzok's text messages indicate the president wanted to know everything. They've tried to explain that away.
I always go back to Susan Rice's email to herself on Inauguration Day. President wanted everything done by the book. She said it twice. Right after noon on January 20th. That thing, I get chills when I think of that.
It's called the CYA.
Yeah, exactly. Memo. Saul, what about narrowing the scope of those questions? Is that giving you any sense of comfort that they would go in there and answer questions by Mueller, given everything we know now?
As I've said many times on this show, if Donald Trump, if he were any white-collar client, any regular white-collar client, famous or not famous, in this circumstance, I would physically prevent him from going in for that questioning. And on the point that Roger raised about the information that the DOJ doesn't want to give over, there are good reasons for not giving over sources and methods. The problem with the DOJ, particularly with the FBI, is they've been caught saying several times, we can't turn this over because it's sensitive, and when they back down and they unredact it, it's just embarrassing. They have a credibility problem.
Molly, Papadopoulos, they kept saying Papadopoulos was this big impetus for the investigation. The more we learn about that, I mean, I'm sorry, but he just seems like a goofball. I mean, I don't know him, but he's like Carter Page, I mean, Papadopoulos. This is like ridiculous. I mean, just look at these figures. They're not exactly, characters you'd imagine, like compiling information and try to get with the Russians. But nevertheless, we keep learning more about who was approaching him at the time.
Right. The more we learn, at first we were told there were all these questions about Russian interference and involvement with the Trump campaign. The more we learn about what led them to think that, it boggles the mind that professionals would actually have started much of any investigation at all over these very piddling things. And yet they did, and they're now admitting they were spying on, at least 4 Trump campaign officials, and that they were using the entire powers of the intelligence apparatus to do this. Regardless of what you think about Donald Trump, this is such a horrible precedent to be spying on political opponents and to be doing it with, and to be avoiding accountability for
They spied on you, right?
The New York Times reported on January 20th of 2017 that there was a FISA warrant on me. I've talked to those reporters. They will not retract their story. I've asked through a FOIA request for information. It's been denied. We're going to move to a lawsuit.
This is frightening. I'm sorry. I'm not saying this as a Republican or conservative. I find it frightening that the power of the federal government could be used in this manner in the middle of a political season with spurious or scant evidence. We're out of time, guys. I wish we could hold you guys for the hour. Fantastic panel.